now read a second time. This is a bill to ensure that people in Australia get paid properly, whether they're citizens or visitors. It will put some responsibility on head offices in franchise chains to have a better understanding of what is going on in the stores that carry their name. And it's a bill that will also help make contracts fairer for small business franchisees, many of whom say that turning a profit and paying the legal minimum wage are often incompatible under the terms and conditions of their franchise arrangements. Mr Deputy Speaker, many of us have gone into a 7-Eleven. We've probably done it at a time when other stores are closed, and most of us have presumed that the person behind the counter is getting paid properly for having to work in convenient hours so that the rest of us can enjoy that convenience. But over the past few months, Australians have been shocked by reports that have exposed rampant exploitation of workers in 7-Eleven franchises across the country. One man, Michael Fraser, has dedicated years of his life to learn of the plight of workers in 7-Eleven stores across the country and to stand up for them. Michael first noticed something was strange in the Runaway Bay 7-Eleven store across the road from his house on the Gold Coast. When Michael would visit the store to get bread, milk and some other items, he kept seeing the same worker, Sam Pendham. It seemed to Michael that Sam was working a never-ending shift. Over a number of months, Michael became friends with Sam. Sam and the other employees in that Runaway Bay store began telling Michael about the lengths of the shifts they were required to work and the pay and conditions they'd receive. And they told him that this kind of exploitation was happening throughout the 620 7-Eleven franchises across the country. And this led Michael to begin a years-long investigation, where he gathered information and evidence from 7-Eleven franchises around Australia that indicated Sam was right. Workers throughout 7-Eleven franchises were being paid for half the hours they were working, now known as the half pay scam. Workers weren't getting paid penalty rates or even being given breaks, and they were being intimidated into accepting this underpayment and these conditions. Sam Pendham is an international student from India. In fact, the majority of people working in 7-Eleven stores are people who come here on student working visas. Something to reflect on, Mr Deputy Speaker. In almost all the cases around the country, the 7-Eleven store employees are those who are here on student working visas. And a condition of these visas is that workers can only work 20 hours a week. But the 7-Eleven franchises were forcing them to work over this number of hours to earn enough money to cover even their basic expenses, breaking the conditions of their visa. And that meant that they were at risk of deportation if the authorities were to become aware of the hours that they worked. As more and more stories and evidence came to light, it became apparent that 7-Eleven's business model was dependent on their franchises employing people on working visas who weren't necessarily aware of their rights at work, who did not understand our systems in place designed to enforce our labour laws, and who were afraid to speak up about this exploitation because, if they did, they risked deportation. And it was back in 2012 that Michael first got in contact with 7-Eleven's head office to discuss with them what he had found. Yet they continued to avoid him and ignore his request to meet and the information he shared with him. They knowingly and blatantly allowed this exploitation to continue. And it was only when ABC's Four Corners and Fairfax Media went public with Michael's findings and other evidence of this widespread exploitation of 7-Eleven workers that the head office even began to acknowledge that there was a systemic problem throughout their franchises. I take this moment, introducing this bill, to congratulate the Fairfax journalists Adele Ferguson and Sarah Dankert, as well as their teams, as well as Michael Fraser, for pursuing these reports, for speaking to these workers and for exposing this widespread exploitation. Because now there's a question about what we should do about it and what we as legislators should do about it. With reports continuing to break of the head office being complicit in this widespread exploitation and public pressure continuing to grow, the owner and chairman Russ Withers, who is at the helm of a multi-billion-dollar empire, CEO Warren Wilmot and General Manager of Operations Natalie Dalbo have resigned. 7-Eleven has also set up an independent panel to hear reports of exploitation and pay people for the hours that they worked. And I hope this panel is successful in its stated aims, and these people who have been vastly underpaid for the hours they work really do receive the wages that they're owed. But for the people working for 7-Eleven to come forward to the panel, they need to know that by speaking up they won't risk being deported. And that's why the Prime Minister and this government must grant anyone on a temporary working visa for 7-Eleven an amnesty. When these reports first broke, I referred these shocking claims to the Senate inquiry into Australia's temporary work visa programs and requested they hold a special hearing. I believe these claims must be properly heard so that we can learn how to prevent this scale of exploitation occurring in the future. And so I am pleased that the Senate committee agreed to the Greens' call for a special hearing into these claims. It is clear that something is wrong with our system when the boss of 7-Eleven is a billionaire and its workers are getting paid under $10 an hour and threatened with deportation. It's wrong that people are being paid for only half the hours they work or not receiving penalty rates or proper conditions. And it's doubly wrong if this is happening because they are fearful of having their visas cancelled. Too much exploitation is happening under our current system of visa and workplace laws, and that is why we need this bill. There are many more reports that suggest this kind of widespread worker exploitation doesn't end with 7-Eleven. In fact, Fairfax Media has exposed many more examples of people working for below minimum wage and not receiving their conditions at work. And these are the people they call the workers who live in the shadows. Journalists and whistleblowers expose the 7-Eleven scam and are now exposing many more, but the reality is that government should have picked it up earlier. As politicians, we must now ask how this kind of widespread flouting of labour laws could happen. If you don't pay your tax, Mr Deputy Speaker, the tax office comes after you and comes down on you like a ton of bricks. But it seems that in this country, in the corner stores that we all go into on a daily basis, you don't have to comply with industrial relations law. If you ignore labour law, nothing happens, it seems. It's time to treat labour laws as seriously as tax laws, so that everyone in Australia, whoever they are and wherever they come from, gets paid a legal wage. So I'm introducing this bill, the Fair Work Amendment Recovery of Unpaid Amounts for Franchisee Employees Bill 2015, into the House today to address one part of the problem. The bill amends the Fair Work Act 2009 by inserting a new Part 6(4) AA into the Act, which provides for employees employed by a franchisee to recover unpaid remuneration from the franchisor or head office entity. This is modelled in similar provisions in Part 6(4)A of the Act that deal with workers in the textile and clothing industry. This will allow people who have been underpaid in franchise stores to go straight to head office to claim their underpayments if they haven't been able to sort it out with their direct employer. The bill will help prevent widespread worker exploitation in franchises like that in 7-Eleven across the country. And it'll do this by making head office franchisors responsible for their franchisees' underpayments. Why should we do this? Well, if head offices can enter into franchise contracts and then turn a blind eye to what happens in their stores under their brand name, workers can get exploited, as we have found out. And when it comes to stopping underpayments, prevention is better than cure. By allowing workers to claim any underpayments directly from head office, this law will bring about a culture shift, because instead of leaving it to vulnerable workers to uphold the law through expensive legal action, head offices would take more responsibility for what goes on in the stores that carry their name. There's an important point about this bill too that I want to stress. The head office could still pursue the franchisee for the amount of any underpayment, but they'd have an extra incentive for ensuring the underpayment didn't happen in the first place. So how it would work in a practical sense is that the employee could serve a demand on the head office, and if there was no payment, then take the head office to court and get the money from them, and the head office would have the responsibility then for pursuing the franchisee operator. Now, but it would mean that the underpaid person gets paid first, and the others can sort out amongst them who is responsible. And this will also help stamp out the practice of unfair franchise contracts, where franchisors effectively force franchisees to underpay workers if the business is to make a profit. And this is crucial in the context of 7-Eleven. We have seen it happen. In the 7-Eleven context, the franchisees, the people who operated and ran the corner 7-Eleven store, were required to give 57% of their gross profit back to head office. And that led a number of them to say, look, we had no choice but to underpay people. Now, whether that's right or not, this bill will help make sure that that never happens again. This bill will help make sure it never happens again, because the franchisor, for 7-Eleven in this instance, will lose any incentive to put small businesses in that kind of difficult situation. So this law will make things fairer for the workers, and fairer for the small business franchise operator. And I call on everyone in this House and the government and the opposition to get behind the bill and help stamp out worker exploitation and exploitation of small business right across this country.